Hello, I'm Chris Wilmot.
And I'm Aaron Wicks.
And welcome to the first ever installment of the Smugtown Beacon Spotlight here on RCTV. Our online publication, smugtownbeacon.com, is now 7 years old, and we have approximately, in that time period, about 250,000 readers, and we've published between the two of us and some other writers, like one of our guests, both of our guests, about 1,000 articles. So we based our publication on this book, which came out in 1957, called Smugtown USA, which is a local favorite by the author Kirk Gerling. So I'll turn it over to Aaron.
Thanks, Chris. Today we're honored to welcome two guests on our first show. First up is New York State Assemblyman Bill Nojay, a Republican representing the 133rd Assembly District. That district covers parts of Monroe County, Livingston, and Steuben counties. Our second and final guest is a member of the Rochester City School Board, Willa Powell, and she'll be joining us a little bit later.
But we began with Assemblyman Nojay. Bill Nojay is an attorney who also was the chief operating officer of the Detroit public transportation system in Detroit, Michigan. He also served as commissioner of the RGRTA, which is the Rochester the Rochester Genesee Regional Transportation Authority. And he's also a radio talk show host, and he's on 9 stations in the central and western New York area daily. And now, since November of last year, he's the assemblyman from the 133rd District, which is Sean Hanna's old district. And without further ado, Bill, welcome.
Well, thank you for having me, gentlemen. Good to be here.
Appreciate it.
And congratulations on your show.
Thanks. We're proud to be here, and we appreciate being invited by RCTV to do the show. Bill, if I may jump in first, as you and I have discussed privately, school and property taxes in New York State are extremely high compared to the other states. We usually finish 49th, 50th. We usually rival New Jersey for some of the highest taxes in the nation. We're also considered to be a very anti-business state, or at least a business-unfriendly state in terms of taxes. And I think this is expressed by the number of college graduates that we have at our fine universities and colleges in the Rochester area, that unfortunately most of them don't stick around. They go somewhere else. It's a tough question for anybody, but how would you address this, and how are you trying to address this in the Assembly?
Well, it's funny. Everything that you just said, we could have said 30 years ago. I remember when George Pataki was running in 1994 against Mario Cuomo. And all of the situations, all the facts that you just recited were exactly what George Pataki was saying. Then we had 12 years of George Pataki, and then we've had Governor Spitzer and Governor Patterson, now Governor Cuomo, and that is probably going to be the range of issues that are going to be on the table in the 2014 elections. It is a bad situation. My wife and I put 3 kids through college, through high school, and their classmates are all now graduating through college. And none of these young people have got jobs if they're in this area. They're at best working at bartenders and things like that with their college degrees. They've got huge student loan debt. We've got huge unemployment. Look at the city of Rochester. Rochester, Buffalo, Syracuse, in smaller cities like Hornell. I represent the city of Hornell. Used to be a city of almost 20,000 people. Now it's a city of 8,000 people. Those are Detroit numbers in terms of population loss. 95% of our school districts in upstate New York are smaller today in student enrollment than they were 10, 20 years ago. It is, and finally, you mentioned the rankings. We are always, if not the last state in the country, or one of the last 3 or 4 states in the country, depending upon whether California and Illinois and New Jersey want to make us look good in some particular ranking. It's not good, and it's been a problem for 30 years. We've lost 300,000 manufacturing jobs, got the highest taxes in the nation. So what do you do about it? Look, at some point, the elected leaders in this state have got to bite the bullet and say you cannot have the most expensive Medicaid program in the country by more than 1/3 more expensive than even places like California, and survive as a competitive place to do business. You cannot have the highest utility costs and the highest utility taxes. You've simply got to cut back on the spending. And yet every time a proposal comes before the state legislature and the governor talks about these things, all the governors have, Republican and Democrat, and yet to actually cut back has proven next to impossible politically.
Bill, what do you think about the possibility of some sort of regional autonomy for upstate New York? It's a much more conservative part of the state than New York City. the culture is different. The political landscape is different. I mean, it's night and day. And probably since the inception of the state, there's been this dispute between who's giving more, who's paying more in taxes, who gets more in benefits. Obviously, statehood and secession is probably not on the table. But is there any possibility of some sort of autonomous arrangement where upstate can have a little more control of its destiny?
You know, the federal building in Rochester is named after a fellow named Ken Keating. And in fact, when Smugtown, USA was written, and that was about the time Nelson Rockefeller called Ken Keating, who was in retirement. He had been a congressman, two-star general, successful businessman, said, "I need you to run for the United States Senate." And Keating said, "Why?" And I'm retired down in Lima. And the answer was, Rocky said, "I need balance in the ticket." And he wasn't talking about Democrat, Republican. He was talking about upstate, downstate. We've lost that over the last 50 years since Ken Keating served in the Senate.
I think the last one, sorry to interrupt you, but the last upstate or Western New Yorker we had in the lieutenant governor's position before Duffy was Stan Lundeen.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, these have not been great forces in the government.
They have not. I mean,
New York.
with all respect to Bob Duffy, he has not been a significant player in the Cuomo administration. Stan Lundeen, by most accounts, was not in the previous Cuomo administration. Yeah. I think your question is a great one. I remember when I was in my early 20s walking around in the Southern Tier, and Randy Cool, who went on to become a congressman, he was a state assemblyman at the time, had pamphlets about creating a 51st state. That's not going to happen. I call it cotton candy talk. It's fun to have, but it doesn't have any lasting impact. On the other hand, I think home rule might be a phrase that we start talking about more in upstate New York. And interestingly, as New York City's political culture has more and more dominated upstate politics, and the financial costs and the job losses and so on have had a huge impact upon our economy, folks in New York City are learning that financially that doesn't work out so well for them, because both the Rockefeller Institute and the Center for Governmental Research here in Rochester have done independent studies and concluded that New York City is in fact subsidizing upstate to the tune of over $6 billion a year. My prediction is that when Bill de Blasio wants to do deals with all those labor unions in New York City to throw a few more dollars their way, he's going to start, and a lot of the New York City Council members are going to start looking at that $6 billion and saying, why are we doing this again? Tell me again why we're subsidizing upstate New York. And that will start a discussion about how to right-size upstate's government and the cost of doing business in upstate New York, and maybe we'll have a home rule discussion.
In addition to home rule, a controversial way to trim costs, successful in some parts of the country, less in others, virtually impossible in some parts of the country, perhaps in the Northeast, is the idea of municipal consolidations and mergers. Yeah. The Democrat and Chronicle 20 years ago had a piece in the paper, and they said that the best they could calculate, there were 753 different levels of government in Monroe County. There were only 745,000 people in our county. That's a lot of government. And that includes, you know, to be fair, lighting districts, fire districts. We have a lot of villages that are parts of towns, et cetera. What's your opinion on mergers and consolidations? First of all, if we can do it legally, and that's debatable, is it something you would support?
You know, the best response to that was from our friend, Chris, Don Riley.
Yep.
Don Riley, former Grease supervisor, went on to become the CEO of the Regional Transportation Authority. When the question of consolidation would come up, Don would say, well, all right, let's talk about consolidation. Why do we need 50 states anyhow? Why don't we just sort of merge some of these states together? I mean, take a look at New Hampshire and Vermont. They're right next to each other. They're little states. Let's squish them together. And by the way, they used to be part of New York, so why don't we go back to that? You know, it's a silly discussion because the bottom line is, and I don't mean silly in a dismissive way, but every time it comes up, when voters have a chance to vote on merging, whether it's school districts or villages into towns, it's almost inevitably turned down, with a couple of exceptions.
There have been a few exceptions. Yep.
But the other thing we've learned with consolidation, it really does not save money. With school district consolidation, you still have to have the teachers in the classroom. You still have to have the equipment. You might be able to close down a couple of buildings, but that's because the student population is dropping. It's not because of the consolidation. So I think that's another cotton candy discussion. It sounds good to people that don't know about the economics of government, but at the end of the day, it's not going to save you much money by merging school districts and villages into towns. And it's been rejected by voters. So I think you're going to spend a lot of time talking about it, and it's not really going to lead anywhere constructive.
Well, speaking of cotton candy, I'd like to change the subject a little bit and talk about a cotton candy gubernatorial candidacy. It was reported late in the year that a group of Republicans, you among them, met with Donald Trump, and a memo was leaked to the public, to the media, outlining the case for a Trump candidacy for governor. Do you have any concerns that the flirtation with Trump might scare off some potential gubernatorial candidates on the Republican side as they wait to see what Trump is going to do?
No, I don't think so. In fact, I think it's a healthy discussion. I think Carl Palladino's involvement with the discussion about the gubernatorial run is healthy. I think Donald Trump's at least looking at the possibility is healthy. The fact is the Republican Party does not have a single statewide seat. It has lost the state Senate. It's a clear minority in the state assembly. The Republican Party, frankly, needs a Hail Mary maneuver to get a little ground, to gain some traction in New York State politics. And if Donald Trump is part of the discussion on that, I welcome him to the discussion and the debate. And I hope he does get involved with New York State politics. I think he'd make a great candidate and a great governor.
We're down to about 2 minutes, and it goes very quickly, too quick. A little bit of a softball question, but a fair question, and I think something that might educate our viewers. In your, let's say, 15 months, well, about a year now, you've been in the State Assembly. What's most surprised you about your tenure? And secondly, what's been highly predictable since you became a member of the Assembly?
I think the thing that's been the biggest surprise and frankly disappointment is the extent of the corruption. The New York State Assembly is unquestionably, I mean, it's documented. We just had the Moreland Commission report, one of the most corrupt legislative bodies in America. And that's a sad thing. It's an embarrassing thing for me to be a member of that party or the Assembly. The state Senate's not much better. We've all read the stories. I don't think the governor's office or the attorney general or the controller's offices are much better. We all focus on the legislature. Remember that not a dollar gets spent in New York State without sign-off by the controller and the attorney general and the governor. So it is an endemic problem in New York State government. It is New York City based. I think it comes out of the New York City political culture. We've got to do something about it. You can have a long conversation about what that something should be, but that's been the biggest surprise. We all talk about it, we read about it in the newspaper. Until you are there in Albany watching the sausage being made, you don't realize that the sausage, it's just, everybody is just waiting in a cesspool of corruption in Albany. In terms of the future or what I would like to see happen, we need more openness and transparency in New York State government. There's a lot of talk about that. Get the politicians to really be open. That's the real challenge.
Yeah. We're just about out of time, but I want to thank you very much, and I'm going to ask you to come back at some point if you would.
I'd love to come back.
We really appreciate it. You're a very candid politician, and good questions, good answers, and appreciate you being here today, Bill. So thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah.
Thank you, gentlemen. Good to see you.
Thank you.
Next up is Willa Powell, and we'll be right back with Willa.
Smugtownbeacon.com, your local political watchdog. Are you mad as hell? And are you tired of being unemployed or underemployed? What do you think? Smugtownbeacon.com, where free speech is alive and well.
Welcome back to the second segment of Smugtown Beacon Spotlight. Our second guest is in the studio with us, and here to introduce her is Chris Wilmot.
Thanks, Aaron. Willa Powell, a longtime Democrat on the Rochester City School Board, is with us. She was first elected in 1997. In fact, when I was in the county legislature, Willa used to help me with my literature, and I used to help her back in the day. So we've been good friends for quite a long time. Willa is urban by choice. She has spent the vast majority, if not the entirety of her life in Rochester, in the city of Rochester. She has 4 children. 2 have graduated high school. 1 is in elementary school and 1 is in high school. She is a retired captain who served in the U.S. Army Reserves, as did her husband, Don Powell. She also was appointed by her fellows, her peers on the Rochester City School Board, to serve on the Big 5 Conference of New York school districts, which are the largest 5 districts in the state. And I guess without further ado, I'd like to thank and welcome Willa Powell to our show. Thanks, Willa.
Thank you so much. I
Thanks for
appreciate
being here.
Glad to be here.
Well, I'd like to start with a sort of big picture question. I live in the city as well, and from my point of view as a homeowner in the city, the biggest economic development program that the city could implement would be to improve the schools, because the main reason that a lot of people move out of the city is to move to a better school district. Lovely Warren made that argument in her campaign for mayor, and yet most of the folks in my part of the city did not support her. At least looking at the election returns, that didn't appear to be the case. Why do you think it's such a challenge in our city to get people across the political spectrum and across the class spectrum, et cetera, to see the importance of all of us strengthening our educational system rather than just blaming the school district? How do we change that?
Well, that's a terrific question, and I've asked myself that question for 16 years. Because I have often said that if the middle class folks that were leaving our city to go to suburban schools stayed in our urban districts, their children most likely would be the exemplars, the rabbits, if you will, in their classrooms and positive role models for the other children. In other words, the very folks who are leaving are the folks who are creating a self-fulfilling prophecy, going to successful schools, and those schools are successful because other parents just like them left before them. If those same people stayed in our district would do better. Instead, the continuous drain, what we call green flight, that is to say anyone who has the money to leave does, creates a situation of overwhelming poverty. So you can't simply improve the schools in order to bring well-to-do people back to the city. In fact, you have to reverse the poverty in order for the schools to do better. So we're in a catch-22 until well-meaning individuals decide that they're going to commit themselves to the process of bringing our urban schools back. It isn't going to happen. I've often heard people say, well, but I'm not prepared to sacrifice my children for my values. And what I really hear them saying is, I don't actually value the city schools or the city, living in the city, because if I did, I would stand for something and teach my children that this is something worth fighting for. So I find the argument a little specious that, we're going to, I'm not going to sacrifice my child for my values. Maybe what you're saying is this isn't really the hill I'm prepared to die on.
It's a great question, and it's a very difficult subject. And on the heels of that, we know a lot of people, Willa, in the educational reform movement, people like Brian Hetherington, there are many others. The research that I've looked at, Jim Gawker's another one, that says that when a school district anywhere in America reaches a certain threshold of poverty, I think it's around 66 to 70%, the evidence seems to say that no school district on its own, without massive state or federal assistance, has ever come back from those kind of staggering numbers. Not only the poverty, but the lack of academic outcomes and high school graduation rates that are very low. As we both know, as all three of us know at this table, the poverty rate in the RCSD is around 88 or 90%, which the measure is who's eligible for reduced lunch program. Save something radical. What can we do about this? Can suburban residents help in any way? I mean, how are we going to fix the RCSD, the school system?
Well, it's a very interesting point because, as I've written in your Smugtown Beacon website essay, the poverty rate in general is going up. Instead of 1 out of every 8 school districts being a district in poverty, we're up to 1 in every 5. There is going to be a report coming out soon that indicates that even Monroe County is going to be less well off than it has been in the past, that the poverty level is going up. What that suggests to me is that folks with money are fleeing further and further away from the urban core, leaving to go to Ontario County, to outside the boundaries of Monroe County. Also, the birth rate is in the city is increasing among poor people, or at least continuing on among poor people, whereas well-to-do folks tend to have fewer children. So it's just tipping the scales more and more towards poverty instead of less. I don't see there is a will in our community to reverse that process. We've got as you say, in addition to Brian Hetherington and his work, you have Bill Calla, who's tried to advocate for a regional school. The charter schools, in effect, simply cream more of our urban students away from the genuinely public schools. So I see the tendency is to even further concentrate poverty. Essentially, if we could build prison walls around the city, I think there are people in our community that would see that as an acceptable solution.
I'm not an expert on the legal issues, and so maybe you can help us out here, but I believe that the state of New York is ultimately responsible for, I think it's a sound basic education is
Correct.
in the
That's right.
Constitution.
Mm-hmm.
Would it be possible for the city of Rochester, the city school district, to basically eliminate itself and say the state is responsible and the problems that we face are much bigger than what resources we can bring to bear on them. So we're going to dissolve and let the state sort it out. And maybe the state then creates new school districts in Monroe County
Right.
that are more balanced between, concentrated poverty and wealthier areas. I know Chris has advocated for that at times too.
Right.
Is that possible?
So you're saying something a la the Memphis.
Yeah, like what happened in Memphis, Tennessee not so long ago. Yep.
In concept, I follow you. It is a remote possibility. I don't see my peers on the city school board making that move. And quite frankly, it's because that is a move that is devoid of all hope. And my colleagues are still hopeful that they can tap into some solution or set of solutions. The right superintendent, right, a pot of magic money appearing, what have you. In fact, so as a practical matter, that's not likely to happen, Aaron. But there is a move to bring back a new lawsuit instead of the Campaign for Fiscal Equity that started in 1993 and resolved itself in 2003 with the Contract for Excellence funding that Governor Spitzer pushed through his first and only budget. Mike Rabal, the lead lawyer, is looking to start a new lawsuit called the Campaign for Educational Equity. And basically he is arguing that, that the state legislature has accepted what is considered a sound basic education, the formula that would be required to deliver that. And having accepted what that number is, but failed to fund to that level, they've accepted their responsibility in failing to meet the constitutional obligation. Also, there are a number of other aspects to this that are not entirely financial, but that basically point to the unconstitutionality of the state's current position on education funding. As you say, it is the state's primary obligation, and school board members are essentially agents of the state in that role. But if the local property values don't support and the education fully, it does fall upon the state to close those gaps. Furthermore, urban districts like Rochester are not the only ones facing financial hardship. There are many small rural districts that are in danger of what they refer to as educational insolvency. That is, they're not necessarily completely without financial resources, but with the tax cap in place that affects rural districts but doesn't affect the city school district, and with the lack of full funding from the state, they can't deliver what the Board of Regents demands.
Yep.
They can't deliver all of the Regents exams. They can't ensure that students are going to have access to AP courses or language courses that might allow them to get that advanced Regents diploma, which is what's needed for college.
We have just a few more minutes left, but let's shift gears just a little. There's a movement in the United States, certainly in New York State, Common Core curriculum, very controversial. you decided to have your son not take the test. Why? Tell us more about your objection to these standards.
Okay. Well, with last year, I continue to hold the option to withhold my son from testing this year or allow him to be tested. I'm still keeping an open mind for this year. But last year, we in the district already performed multiple assessments on our third graders, and I had those results. And I knew that my son was on track for his grade level, and I didn't feel that an additional 4 days of testing was appropriate for him, nor was the stress of, engaging in those activities going to be particularly helpful. The tests themselves had no value. They weren't going to be used to evaluate teachers. They were not going to be used to evaluate my son because they were developed to create a baseline. So my answer is, if it has no immediate value to my child, then I am not willing to participate in this process of establishing a baseline. It's like, what's in it for me? And a lot of parents are asking the same question, not just then, but now as well.
Okay. We have 1 minute left. Aaron, do you have another question?
Is there a 1 minute slice of hope that you can offer? If you could wave a magic wand, where do we start? What's the first thing we need to do?
I think we need to communicate to our parents that they need to get involved. Running away isn't the answer, because now we have the same problems in the suburbs. You've got folks raising alarm bells in our suburban communities about Common Core. The fact is, all of our school districts are measured on the average. And when the cities do poorly, the entire state average comes down. Fairport, Pittsford, they might be able to stand and say, we have the best schools in the state, but when the entire average is as bad as it is, that isn't something to brag about.
Yeah.
So what we should do is all come together and say, let's do well for all of our schools, on all of our school districts, because we're all judged by the same average.
And after all, as the city goes, so goes the metropolitan area, and I think we often forget that. I want to thank you so much, Willa, for coming and being on our first show.
My
Thank you.
pleasure.
Thank you. You did a great job, and we really appreciate the information and the insight. That's about it for us today. Thank you for tuning in to our first show, and thanks for watching. We'll see you soon back in the spotlight.